This is Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network. Welcome back to Hello Brain. I am Collin Adams still, but I am not your host today. Dr. Ramona Von Leden, who's with me, will actually be taking my seat today as the host, and I'm going to flip more onto the interviewee side. So, Dr. Ramona Von Leden, thanks for doing this. It's nice to get out of the host chair, and I'll let you just take it away.
Great. Thank you, Collin. I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation. Today, we flipped the script and are having you be interviewed because of your background in neurofeedback. I think neurofeedback is something that many people have heard of, but probably really don't understand and don't really necessarily know how it fits into health or brain health or even just understanding their brain. So for our listeners, Collin, who is our lovely host, and he often undersells himself, is also a functional medicine coach and an Amen certified brain health coach. And he has done 10 years of work in the neurofeedback space, including as a technician. So he really, he knows neurofeedback, and he can share some knowledge as well as some experiences in that space. So today we'll go through and I'll ask him some questions. We'll break it down, what neurofeedback is, what the goal is with neurofeedback, what an experience might be like for someone who has neurofeedback or goes through the neurofeedback process, and where it might fit into your brain journey. And again, because Collin has this background working in this space, I think it's going to be super fun to unpack it with him. So let's just dive right in and start with some of my first questions. So Collin, I think when people hear neurofeedback, it can sound like a little bit abstract or high tech. How do you help someone understand what neurofeedback is actually doing in the brain or nervous system?
Yeah, I think it often is seen as a bit intimidating or something that the everyday person might not be able to have access to. And, for a long time it has been that way, but neurofeedback essentially is just a form of operant conditioning, kind of like the Pavlov's dog situation, where your brain is teaching itself through a stimulus and a feedback loop how to perform a specific way. And essentially the system is just reading your brainwave activity, and through that is able to, through a protocol, help your brain learn how to operate in a desired state. So if that means that a person struggles with focus like I have in the past, or something with anxiety or mental energy, all of these things are different brain states that in most cases can absolutely be trained, and that's what neurofeedback typically does.
So essentially neurofeedback is brain training.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious how you got involved in neurofeedback to begin with.
Yeah, good question. It's, 10 years ago when I started doing neurofeedback myself, it was something that was not as well known then, even as it is now, and it's still, I would say, not very well known even in the brain health space or in the medical space or the performance space. But I, at the time, was playing college baseball. I was a pitcher, and I was dealing with something called the yips. And if anybody listening is a fan of sports, you'll know that the yips is essentially performance anxiety and really a death sentence for an athlete. If you develop the yips, it's really a fear of performing the thing that you've been performing for so long. And for me, that developed by playing for a really difficult coach my freshman year of college. He and I did not jive well in terms of his coaching style and my need for what I had hoped for with a coach. And so I developed a severe performance anxiety where I probably went from being an athlete or a pitcher in baseball who was maybe a bit overconfident in myself to one who, I couldn't even throw the ball 10 feet to my throwing partner without having physical manifestations and feelings of fear and anxiety. And which was really frustrating as an athlete. And I had aspirations of playing professional baseball, and I was seeing those slip away. And as far as access goes, just kind of by happenstance, my family just happens to be close friends with an NFL quarterback who at the time was working with a neuropsychologist based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I grew up. And through that connection, I was able to also start working with that neuropsychologist. And this neuropsychologist I really like to frame in the context of being more forward thinking. It wasn't necessarily talk therapy or working through an issue in that way, but it was really taking the approach of like, let's look at what's happening in your brain, let's see what's going on here, and then do something about it using your breath, like things you already have access to, and then neurotech, specifically in this case neurofeedback. So that's how I got into it. And because I had such a strong drive to play professional baseball, I attacked the neurofeedback training. I was literally doing at least an hour of neurofeedback 7 days a week, and I didn't miss a single day for at least 2 years.
Oh my God, that's a lot of neurofeedback.
And as a result of doing so much, the way that I got into working in it was I had done so much neurofeedback on myself that the neuropsychologist figured, well, you probably know this system as well as anybody else who's had the education, so will you come work for me and be assigned to this NFL team for the summer while you're out of school? And that's kind of how I got into working with others, not just doing it myself.
Oh, that's fascinating. So did the neuropsychologist that you were working with, did he specialize in athletes? So work with pro teams, college teams, sounds like?
A lot of his background was in pediatrics, so he was for a long time working in the Children's Hospital in the Grand Rapids area for years and years. And then just kind of through neurofeedback started to recognize like neurofeedback, yes, can work with these different complex cases in children, but there's also a very performative aspect to it as well, where we can teach the brain through feedback loops to perform better. So it can almost be seen as a prevention measure rather than just a reactive solution that's non-medication for someone who's struggling with something.
I love that. I will share, I've only tried neurofeedback once, and it was a home system, and I actually tried it on my dog. So, because Mr. Peter has a horrible fear of thunderstorms, like just it really incapacitates him. And I read somewhere online that you could use like basically neurofeedback to help them learn how to be calm when there was storms. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if it worked. It's really hard with a dog because you don't know how much it resonated. But he did have we put the little electrodes on, and I had the whole system. And, we did maybe 20 sessions. And if anything else, he did seem to enjoy it. It definitely was not a negative experience for him. It just was nice music playing, and it would change, of course, and adjust, which we'll talk a little bit about what the process is. But I did a few sessions for myself, but again, I didn't have necessarily a goal in mind for myself. But that's why when I asked you about doing this interview was because I was like, wow, this is actually something which I kind of explored, but I really haven't dug in much, and not in the human world.
Yeah.
So
I've never heard of it being used in dogs, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I think that leads nicely into kind of what, for someone who is okay, this is brain training, what does this look like for someone who goes in? And you said is it an hour? What does a session look like for someone who goes and does a neurofeedback session?
It really depends. And at this point, I've used, I think, 12 different neurofeedback devices pretty extensively on my own brain because I'm just fascinated by neurofeedback, and I like to see all of the different ways that people have developed systems to do neurofeedback. So if you're going into a clinic to do a session, typically they run between 20 and 40 minutes. That method is becoming more and more difficult and obsolete because of all of the home neurofeedback tools that are coming out. A lot of people just can't commit to going into some clinic 3 times a week for an hour to dedicate to this, just because no one has time for anything, much less a neurofeedback session. So that's where you can use different tools to get kind of a different amount of time. I've done sessions over an hour. I've also done sessions more recently that are as short as 3 minutes at home. So it really doesn't have to be a specific amount of time. It really depends on what device you're using and what the intended goal is.
Okay, from now, the one that I used on Mr. Peter was all based on sound, but I believe there's certain that often it's both, right? It's auditory and visual. So could you sort of describe for our audience what it would like if somebody were to come in, let's say in a more traditional clinical setting where they're going in for a neurofeedback session, like what might that experience be?
Yeah, well, that's how I started, so I can explain kind of my own experience with it. You go in, and the very first thing you do is a QEEG assessment, which is essentially just a full cap. They're looking at 21 different locations on the brain to get a full picture of the electrical activity in your brain. And then from that, they will come up with an assessment result similar to getting blood work done or any kind of test, although this is non-invasive. And from the assessment result, the practitioner will then develop a protocol for that specific person and that specific brain. And that's something I really like about neurofeedback. It's very hyper-personalized in most cases, whereas solutions like medication can be more generalized based on a specific condition. Neurofeedback can target a very unique and specific concern or pathway or electrical signal that that person might need or have a deficit in. From there, you will typically do your first session right away just so you can experience it. And what that looks like in a clinical setting is much different than what it looks like at home. In a clinical setting, they're typically using two different electrodes on each ear in order to have a reference and a ground lead, and then they'll have one or maybe two different electrodes pasted onto your head in a different location to create what's called a feedback loop, so that the brain, the electrical signal that's being read in the brain is then in this closed loop system so that it can then be fed into the software that's producing the training. For me, what I loved so much about the training system that I used and thought was super practical was it connected directly to Netflix. And so I was able to do sessions while watching a movie or a show that I probably would have already been watching had I not been doing neurofeedback. So it made the uptake of the training very easy because I got to watch something I liked. As I was sitting watching the video, anytime my brain state would get outside of the desired range that we were training it into, for me specifically, it was training theta ratio to come down because I had a lot of theta, slow-moving brainwave activity in my frontal lobe, which was causing a lot of ADHD symptoms. We were training that down, and any time that that theta number would get too elevated, which is indicative of an EEG pattern that would be associated with ADHD, the movie would skip. Kind of like I was watching a bad disc, or like if you remember back in the day, you put a DVD in. I know we probably don't know what DVDs are anymore, but you put a DVD in, and if there was any kind of scratch on it, the movie would skip. And it was like super frustrating if you were trying to watch that movie. In the same way, my brain would get outside of the desired state and the movie would start to skip. And my brain, I would see that visually, and my brain would take in that feedback as negative reinforcement for the specific behavior, and then it would correct that pattern. And it's kind of like learning to dribble a basketball or play the piano. The more and more and more you reinforce that specific behavior or that skill, you get more solidified in that, and an entire neural network becomes created in the brain to support that new behavior.
So this is fascinating because essentially you're giving sort of negative feedback in the form of the skipping movie, and that's encouraging your brain to go back to the desired state. But is there, what do you know, is there what the theory is on how your brain learns that that's what it needs to get back to? Like that first training session, your brain doesn't know that the reason it's skipping is because the brainwaves have gotten out of that like desired wavelength.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely a bit of a learning curve that happens for the first couple of sessions where the brain is just learning, like, what even is this? What is this experience? And that's why I think it's so important to have, when I'm coaching someone with neurofeedback, I'm always heavier on the front end, both with a coaching session, but also with how many sessions and how often they're happening, so that the brain can take from a novel experience, which would be the first session. It'd be novel, like what is happening, what's going on, what is brain training. The brain's never had to do a bench press before, essentially.
Sure.
So that
So
learning
then
process.
essentially, yeah, so you as a coach in that first session, you would kind of talk them through it and say, you know, give them sort of the heads up. Like if there's a skip in the movie, then it means that your brainwaves are going out of the desired zone. And at least that kind of gives them something to work with, as to know, all right, well, if I'm trying to focus on staying calm, then maybe I need to slow that down or focus inward breath, something like that.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. Education is super important in general, but especially on the front end, so that the person knows what to expect. But the best part about neurofeedback, in my opinion, is that the best and worst part, because I'm extremely competitive, is that your brain is teaching itself. So when I'm sitting there watching the movie, there is nothing that I can actively do to change the result. I just have to watch the movie. And for maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was seeing the video skip, and so I'm like straining myself, really trying to focus and pay attention super hard. And the neuropsychologist I was working with at the time was like, no, like, they're just relax, just watch the movie, just enjoy the movie. Your brain will take in the feedback and it will work on itself and learn the skill, and you just need to watch. So that's where paying attention. Yeah, it's incredible. That's where paying attention was important. Like, I'm looking at the screen because that was the method for neurofeedback. But your brain is, we've talked about, I think even in this podcast, how our brain is always taking in information and deciding what to do with it. Like right now, I can hear a car horn honking in the background, and my brain hears that, and it needs to process it and decide what to do. And most of that happens without us ever recognizing it. So I would say that even outside the context of neurofeedback, our brain is always being trained in one direction or another via neuroplasticity. Neurofeedback is just a very specific way to train the brain to a specific desired state.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. You coached it for 10 years, but do you know, like, how did this process of neurofeedback get started as a tool in the psychological space? Do you know anything about the history of it? Because I'm curious, like, where the idea came from to try this.
Yeah, I don't know all of the specifics. I know that it began, I believe, at UCLA in the 1950s with some neuroscientists testing out behavioral change on mice, and it just kind of developed from there. I don't know the specific process on how it grew and developed. What I do know is that an EEG system, an electroencephalogram, which is how you're measuring the electrical activity of the brain, used to be as large as it would take up an entire room in a hospital. It was huge. And as the technology has gotten better and better and better over time, the very first EEG system that I used was a company called ThoughtTech based out of Toronto. The EEG was mobile, and it was that big. Like for those of you who aren't watching, they're just listening. It's about the size of like a coffee cup. And so they took something that was the size of a room and made it more accessible over time through that kind of an update. And that happened over the course of the 70s and the 80s and 90s, to where they were able to get it into a setting where someone could use it either in a clinic separate from the hospital or at home.
Okay, that's interesting. It's funny, too, that you mentioned sort of that they started at UCLA with mice, because then it's not so crazy to think about using it with dogs.
No, it's definitely not. I just think the hard part with any animal is like getting it to sit still. That's just the fascinating part, with an electrode on their head.
It's funny because you do similarly when I did it with Mr. Peter. You mentioned the clips on the ears, so that was it. Like, you had the ground and you had the receiver clip on his floppy ears, and I had to sit with him the first time and just like keep him super calm. And then after that, I mean, I have pictures of it. It's really cute because he's just like basically blissed out enjoying the session. He never like tried to walk away from it. It was something else.
Just
Okay,
repeating
so this
that.
is yeah, yeah. And as I said, it's hard as you pointed out. It's hard to say how much help it helped, but I will say he's more willing to walk in the rain now. So maybe we've gotten somewhere, and I just not quantifiable. So following up on that, sort of the experience that somebody might have if they went and did a neurofeedback session, does that look different for someone who's focused on maybe a performance issue like you were having, or someone who's looking more for the opposite, like a regulation, recovery, or is there a different type of setup depending on what you're like? You mentioned brainwaves, and we've talked about that on the sleep episode. If you're perhaps having trouble sleeping, is there a neurofeedback process that would be more specific for encouraging those brainwaves versus something that's more in the zone of performance like you were dealing with?
Absolutely. And I would say that in general, each practitioner that I've met or talked to, you don't necessarily start from a place of this person's a high performing executive who wants to show up better at work versus this person can't sleep at all or they can't access deep sleep. You start by doing that assessment so that you can just see what's going on in that person's brain. And I like that about neurofeedback because it's personalized. So I can have my own preconceived notion or idea about what someone's symptoms are and then start to think about, okay, this protocol might be helpful at this location, or maybe this tool will pair nicely with neurofeedback. So you start with the assessment always, because that gives you the visual context of what's happening in that person's brain that might be leading to the symptoms that they're expressing subjectively. And then it's important also to get the context of the person. Like if they are that busy executive, they might be dealing with something like burnout, or they might be not sleeping, or maybe they're not eating properly. So that, this is the brain and it's a holistic approach. Neurofeedback is just one helpful tool to help train the brain, but any practitioner who's using neurofeedback should begin with the assessment and the overall context of the person in order to better understand how neurofeedback can be most helpful. So yes, there is different protocols for sleep, different protocols for focus, different protocols for just getting the brain to be in a more balanced state. They're endless, really.
Interesting. I'm glad you brought up sort of this as one tool in the bigger picture, because that's a question I have. What do you think, if you are a brain coach or if you're a neuropsychologist and you're working with a patient or a client, what do you think something like neurofeedback might pair well with? Is there like and I know that you are certainly in the neurotech space and you understand where these things might go together. What might somebody do with neurofeedback?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can be paired with a lot of different things. Some things that I've noticed are from a functional medicine lifestyle perspective, I have better performance in sessions when I have exercised before, because my brain has influx of oxygenation and blood flow and a lot of movement. Some BDNF started to happen in the brain, so that the brain is just in general more ready to learn, and neurofeedback is a learning experience. The same can be done with things like photobiomodulation. So we had Liam from Neuronic here on the podcast a few episodes ago, and they've seen a lot of success with pairing Neuronic or the photobiomodulation system with neurofeedback, because again, you're just preparing the brain by stimulating the activation of mitochondria in the cells to be more prepared to learn, so the brain can just uptake the training quicker than it would otherwise.
Right.
I've tested so many things at this point. I mean, I've got like an autonomic nervous system chair sitting next to me to my left. I've got audio-based neurofeedback over here.
Is it the shift wave?
Yeah. So I use the shift wave, and I've tested that pre-neurofeedback sessions, and definitely also produces a better result. If I were to compare, like I just wake up in the morning and first thing I do is neurofeedback, I will perform a certain way, and it's still very valuable training. Any training session is a good session regardless of how your brain performs in that session. But if I take a big sip of water, if I get out and move, if I get out in fresh air, my session improves. If I use the shift wave chair, my session improves. If I use photobiomodulation, session improves. So there are a lot of ways that just stimulate a healthier brain in general. And when you
Sure.
create a healthier environment for learning to happen, then learning happens much better.
Right. So it would not be something where you would do the neurofeedback first and have an impact on the performance immediately following. It's better to sort of provide these prep work techniques and then do your neurofeedback session. So that leads me then into, of course, neurofeedback being some kind of training. It's essentially a practice for your brain. For someone who starts with neurofeedback, and from your own experience, how long do you think it typically takes for someone to maybe notice a difference in whatever it is that they're focused on?
I'm going to give the really annoying answer in the brain health space, and that is that it completely depends on the person, their context, where their brain was at before, the things they're doing on a daily basis. There are definitely things like I've talked about before that will stimulate a faster result, like photobiomodulation, exercise, proper eating, hydration, all of that stuff. Sleep is a big indicator of length of results. But I'll also share my own experience. When I started pre-neurofeedback, I was the kind of person who could not hold a conversation for more than 30 seconds because I would either mentally check out, I would get irritated, frustrated, or just wouldn't know how to carry on a conversation. My room was a complete mess, and that's probably pretty common among college age guys, but you couldn't see the floor, like legit. There was clothes, books, papers everywhere, and my bed was never made, so it was like a tornado went through there. Obviously was having the issues with baseball, with anxiety, having problems in school. About 2.5 weeks into my training, and remember, I was pretty vigorous with this, about an hour every day. I did not miss. My dad happened to call me at college, and after about an hour on the phone, he stopped the conversation and was like, "Collin, do you realize that we've been talking for over an hour now? This would have never happened before."
Whoa, that's cool.
I think you might be like calming down internally, and I think this system might be helping you. So it's actually, in my case, and in many cases with neurofeedback, it's people who are around the individual doing the neurofeedback that notice a change before the individual does. Because one thing that I think is really important to say is that neurofeedback is not innately changing who the person is. It's just, I always say it's helping them become more of who they are. It's like unlocking those different dysregulations that are happening in the brain and turning them into regulation so that they can just be more of who they are. So I didn't necessarily change as a person. I just got unlocked from brain fog and from frustration and low activity in my frontal lobe. So then, kind of fast forwarding about 3 months into the training, I was able to successfully wean off of medication. My room went from being that total disaster to one that was like military style clean. So like the floor was clean, my bed was made, and everything was tucked in on my bed. The pillows were arranged upright and looked really good. All my school books were in order of the time that I would need them during the day, and my life was cluttered to I used day scripting as a tool to really sequence out every 15 minutes of my day. And so in that, I didn't notice that I was different. I just felt more free to be who I knew that I was.
This is interesting because a lot of the things that you're talking about in what changed, although it sounds like the impetus for doing neurofeedback was your experience with performance on your in baseball, but this is all related to your ADHD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? These are the same things that we've talked about in the ADHD episode. It's the having a routine and being able to increment out your day in those 15-minute increments. So, and even the concentration, I mean, your dad noticing that you were able to have an hour-long conversation without getting irritated, distracted, etc., all kind of speaks to this being very helpful to those issues you were having with your ADHD.
Yeah, and if we think about the brain doesn't just operate in a vacuum. So like I can't single out my performance anxiety and say like when I address my brain health, I'm just going to really only fix that. When you start to train the brain, the whole thing starts to act differently. So yeah, it really helped my performance anxiety. I completely overcame the yips, which is almost unheard of in sport. But also,
that's tough, yeah.
it is, but also I was much more regulated emotionally. I wasn't having these huge outbursts of anger or frustration or sadness or like too much like out of context happiness. It was very measured, but it was still me. And like my room was clean, my day was organized. All of those things came as a result of doing neurofeedback, even though my intention was towards baseball.
That's really interesting. That's really cool. What a cool story. It makes sense why you would end up working in it for 10 years at this point.
Yeah.
So let's see. We hit a lot of the questions I had about it. I think, let's say, you mentioned this actually. I think this would be good for our listeners. You mentioned that at this point, there's a lot of different neurofeedback systems. There's home use systems, as I kind of talked about, that I used with Mr. Peter. There's more coming in and having a coach in a clinic. If someone were interested in trying neurofeedback, what would you suggest is like, where should they start? How do they figure out which system might work for them?
Oof. Yeah, good question. I think that it is helpful to have the support of a coach walking alongside you as you begin neurofeedback because it can be confusing. Neurofeedback is not the kind of intervention where you immediately feel something after a session is over. In fact, after my first session, I actually kind of had a little bit of a headache. And so someone could interpret that as, oh, that was bad. Like, I don't want that. Or they might not feel something that you might get from photobiomodulation or the amount of mental clarity you'd have after going for a run. And that can be frustrating. And you can think, oh, it's not working. I don't want to do this anymore. So having the coach to kind of walk alongside you and guide you on the process and how to set expectation is really important. Like if I didn't have a coach, I would have gotten a headache and thought, uh-oh, like I just did that wrong. When in reality,
sure.
my brain just worked out for the first time ever. Yeah, maybe a little bit mentally fatigued from that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have known that otherwise. So I think it's really important to get into a system where you can have a support around you. As far as devices go, there's a ton of them out there. The two that I'm currently using are Mendi, MENDI, which is FNIRS neurofeedback, which actually instead of EEG more so measures the amount of oxygenated blood moving through the prefrontal cortex. So that was a lot of big fancy words. I'm not actually that smart. It's really just measuring the amount of blood flow that's passing through the boss of your brain. And
right.
So I use that one every day. And then the second one is an audio-based neurofeedback that I really like called Vital Neuro. We actually just talked to Alex Doman here on the Hello Brain podcast. He's a friend of the show. He was the co-founder in one of these companies called Vital Neuro, where it's audio-based feedback, and I really like that because I'm able to continue my day while I do it. So it's audio, so I can still keep working and get the benefit of neurofeedback, which I really value because I have stuff going on all day and don't always have the time to step away and pay attention to a screen. So Vital Neuro and Mendi are the two that I'm using right now.
I agree with you. I think that's actually, I think I've known some other people who've done neurofeedback, and again, sort of the clinic setting, a little bit more typical. And it's, as you mentioned, you did it for 2 years, and you're watching Netflix, but maybe you're there for an hour, or maybe you're there for more than an hour. And not everybody can do that. It's certainly not every day, and probably most people aren't doing it every day. But if you had something like a Vital Neuro headset that, as you said, you can take with you, you could be doing it while you're on a walk. You could be doing things where you're getting the rest of your life, and it's not something where you have to physically go somewhere. I think that can be a lot more accessible to masses. It's funny you bring up the FNIRS. At Neuronic as well, I think we mentioned it a few times in the podcast. I work as a scientific advisor for them, and our research lead, Will, he's in the middle of his PhD right now, and he's doing it largely around using FNIRS as a measurement tool in photobiomodulation and how you can compare them together. Because we talked about this, and you just mentioned it, light therapy or photobiomodulation, one of the things it does is increase blood flow. And so FNIRS versus an EAG might be the more appropriate tool for looking at how you've impacted the brain, because you're actually looking at like the hemodynamics, how much blood flow is coming into the prefrontal cortex, the brain boss, as you like to call it. So it's a very cool, I think, still emerging technology. I think it likely will become as well known, maybe even take over in some spaces from EEG because of how it is measuring the brain.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to have Will on to do an FNIRS podcast. I think that'd be cool. Yeah. All right. I think I'd like to wrap up with one more question for you. As I said, we've mentioned this, you've been in this space for almost 10 years, or at least you have done it for 10 years now. Where do you think the future of neurofeedback is going, and maybe how that plays into our overall brain health?
Yeah, well, I think as far as the future of neurofeedback, I have a personal project that I'm keeping close to the chest right now.
Ooh.
In terms of what I most hope for with neurofeedback. As far as brain health goes, I just love how many people are talking about it. And I love that you can go onto any social platform, and it's not just brain health in the context of injury or concussion or TBI, but it's brain health in the context of how can we take care of this extremely vital organ that we really haven't paid much attention to in the past. And so I think that from a perspective of looking into the future of brain health, neurofeedback is an excellent tool. It continues to progress. It continues to improve. People are innovating in this space every day, and that's exciting to see because it's such an accessible tool to use. But really, people are just starting to pay more attention to their brains, and obviously with this show, we're trying to help people meet their brain. So conversations like this are being had, and it's just a real joy to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Collin, this was a great conversation. I'm so glad that I flipped the script on you and made you be the interviewee. And I think it's, as I said, it's exciting. It's a neurofeedback as a term, I think, has become thrown around, and people hear it, but I don't think that most people actually understand what it is. And I think you did a great job of breaking it down in a way that makes more sense, might put it into the context of why someone might use it. So if anybody who's listening sparked, some curiosity about your own brain, your performance, your recovery, that's just the beginning, right? You've got some avenues to go, some different tools to check out. Maybe you check out the Vital Neuro headset, or what was the other one with the
Mindy.
Mindy. Yeah. That's one I haven't heard of, so I'll have to look that one up as well.
Great.
And I think this just leads into more avenues where we can support and continue to grow and understand our brain, which really is the whole point of this podcast, right? And this conversation.
It is, yeah. Yeah. And I think really quickly, if someone is looking around and like, where on earth do I find neurotech, or where do I find trustworthy supplements, or where do I find things that are going to really help my brain, and I can know that they're legit and not just a bunch of fluff. Brain Innovation Network actually has a marketplace where we host a lot of these things and these products. So it's just shop.braininnovationnetwork.com. Very easy to find. That is our official marketplace, and a lot of these products that I talk about are listed on those as well.
And those products that are listed on Brain Innovation, I'm glad you brought this up. You've vetted them, right? You have some comments on what they do on your marketplace, so that it's not just another place to purchase, but a place to actually learn about the technology.
Right. We have of which you are a part of, we have a incredibly well-versed, world-class advisory team that oversees a lot of our actions at Brain Innovation Network. People from around the globe with a lot of different backgrounds in the neuroscience space who are looking over and making sure that these devices that we put up there, these supplements, are vetted, They do work. They do help people. It's not just fluff for marketing's sake.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Good time to give them a shout out. Well, thank you for listening. And till next time, this is Hello Brain.
You've been listening to Hello Brain, presented by Brainovation Network.